two very different experiences. But I think as soon as you get into Gaza, you notice the difference in Rafah. The massive difference in March, it was pre-Rafah invasion. We stayed in Rafah that evening in the guest house, and I remember looking out the window and seeing children playing on a swing. And this time, when we went through the Karam Shalom crossing, I couldn't recognize Rafah. There was no buildings. There was absence of anyone. I didn't see a person until about 10 minutes into the drive. And it just reminded me of like an apocalypse. It was just rubble. And then once we've got into the hospital, the same injuries are still continuing, but there's less consumables, there's less equipment to use for them. Everyone is more tired. Colleagues that we'd met previously have been displaced again and again. You count who is still alive and who's not out of the colleagues that you worked with in March.
I mean, as a doctor, I suppose you're trained to deal with casualties. You're trained to sort of, keep some sort of emotional distance. How does that work in Gaza with the sheer volume of people that you have to treat?
So I think there's a difference in the two trips that I had. In the first trip, in Deir al-Balah, it was airstrike after airstrike, mass casualty after mass casualty. So you go into surgeon mode, you go into, let's just fix this, let's just get this sorted, and, deal with the emotions afterwards. This time at Nasser Hospital, I was there for longer, so it gave me an opportunity to talk to patients for longer and find out their stories, and it's off the scale. And it's not even the patients, it's the colleagues. So one of my colleagues, between middle of cases, he said, I was operating and in July, and I spoke to my wife for 15 minutes, and then half an hour later I heard that there was an airstrike to my house, and his wife, his parents, his two children were killed. And he was operating at Nasser Hospital. And then he gets home and he can only find his wife's foot. He can only find his child's arm. And then he told me this story and my eyes start welling up because that's kind of a natural response. And then he says, Alhamdulillah. And then we carry on with the case.
There have been many reports of medical staff being targeted by the Israelis. Did you yourself see any evidence of that while you were there?
No, I didn't see any evidence of that, but I spoke to a lot of people who had been targeted. So one of my friends now, I'd say, but he was a colleague at Al-Aqsa, had been detained by the Israeli army whilst they were sieging Shifa the first time. He said he was evacuating Shifa and he was called over because he was wearing scrubs. He was detained, I think that was in December, and he was released in February, and I met him in March. And then I spoke to countless anaesthetists that were at Nasser Hospital when Nasser was sieged, and they talked to me about their detention.
The Israelis claim that in many cases when they bomb a hospital, it's because Hamas fighters are using it to, find shelter there or to kind of keep their weapons there. Did you see any evidence of that?
No evidence, nothing. And in Nasser and Aqsa, we had unfettered access to the whole compound because the nature of us is our patients were everywhere.
What is the most searing image that you took home with you to Britain?
One of the images that really haunts me is from my first trip. There was a mass casualty, and it was one of our last evenings. And when a mass casualty happens, it's chaos. And I remember walking past a girl, and she can't have been older than 20. And her face, I just remember seeing her face, and she couldn't open her eyes. Her every limb was broken. She had blood coming out of her abdomen. She was just crying, and there was no one around her. And I think that image always stays with me.
Dr. Ana Jeelani, I appreciate your courage. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Matt.